bedtime, and guess what? I've got us a scary book. Little Tales of Michael Dawes. And I think we are gonna start with, let's see. Okay, it's called The Darkest Bridge. So you lay back and I hope you won't get too scared. Okay, so The Darkest Bridge. You ready? Okay. So, it was midnight when three bikes stopped in the middle of a bridge. The bridge spanned a deep ravine. Far below, a swiftly moving stream was quietly murmuring. One girl called Tina said, "What's wrong? Why did you stop?" Her older sister, Zoe, her hands still on the handlebars of her bike, looked at her and smiled. "Don't you know where we are?" "I do," popped up a voice behind them. It was Tina's friend Nisa. "It's the haunted bridge." "Are you kidding me?" said Tina. "It's true," said Nisa. "Right, Zoe?" The girls had gone to see a scary movie in town that night. On her way home, Zoe had decided to lead them on a different route. They had ridden away from the lights of a small town towards a thick forest. After riding down a country road lined with tall trees, they reached the old wooden bridge. "Are you telling me there are ghosts living on the bridge?" asked Tina. Tina loved scary movies. She also loved watching TV shows about ghost hunters and listening to podcasts about weird and spooky events of history. She had never actually seen a ghost herself, but she hoped to. "Not on the bridge," said Nisa. "Under the bridge." "That's not exactly the story," said Zoe. "Tell me," begged Tina. She had to know. Zoe turned so she could see both girls. "It was 80 years ago tonight," she began. "Some children were coming back from a church picnic." "A picnic at night?" asked Tina. "It was all day," said Zoe. "They had a bonfire or something at night. Anyway, these children were riding their bikes back to town. It started raining and they were crossing this very bridge." Tina heard a sound somewhere on the other side of the bridge, maybe an owl. "The girl whose bike was the last one went over the bridge and hit a patch of water," continued Zoe. "That doesn't sound good," said Tina. The owl hooted again. Zoe said, she on the bridge? Will we see her walking around? Will we hear her scream? Whispered Nisa. Zoe shook her head. It's spookier than that. They say that sometimes, if you're riding your bike over the bridge, it will stop and you won't be able to move. Why? Asked Tina. The dead girl needs another bike to ride home, said Zoe. So she'll grab yours because hers is down in the water. That is spookier, agreed Nisa. Wait, cried Tina, I can't move my bike. She's grabbed it. The other girls laughed. What's so funny? Said Tina. The fear made her angry. Zoe, said Nisa, giggling. She's holding the back of your bike. Zoe laughed out loud. Very funny, muttered Tina. Let's get out of here. Wait, said Nisa. What's that? They heard a faint bump, then another. It came from behind them, towards the end of the bridge. One after another, the wooden planks creaked. It sounded as though a bike was riding onto the bridge. You are doing that, Tina shouted at Zoe. No, I'm not, said her sister. I'm getting out of here, Tina said. She mounted her bike and pushed the pedals as fast as she could. Zoe was close behind her. Nisa shouted, I can't move. My wheels are locked or something. I'm not making it up. Help me. I don't believe you, yelled Tina. Please, begged Nisa. There were no lights on the bridge. Only their dim bike headlights lit the surroundings. But as Tina watched in horror, she saw a skinny white arm reach over the edge of the bridge and grab the rear tire of Nisa's bike. Suddenly the three headlights flickered and went out. The girls were now in a thick darkness. She's got my foot, screamed Nisa. Tina jumped off her bike, pushed her aside, and ran onto the darkened bridge. She felt for the nearest railing and followed it to where she had last seen her friend. Don't go, shouted Zoe. Tina walked further and further onto the bridge. She waved her free hand around, hoping to touch Nisa or her bike. Nisa, where are you? She called. There was no sound except for the murmur of a stream below. Then the murmur grew louder. It became a loud hum, and then a rumble. Nisa, shouted Tina desperately, where are you? The rumble grew even louder, and then a flash of light, two lights. A huge truck was racing down the road. It roared onto the bridge. Tina felt a small hand gripping her ankle as the lights grew brighter than the sun and smashed through the darkness. The small hand gave a sharp yank. A wave of cold air surrounded Tina as she toppled off the bridge. The truck rumbled overhead. Tina fell through the darkness. She heard Nisa's screams from far below as she plunged down to join her. That's the end. I hope you like it and you're not too scared. Not yet. Because what I want to do now, because it's only been 5 minutes that we Costello. He and Grant stood in the backyard. The sun blazed down on them from a cloudless blue sky. The big blue paddling pool had taken Mr. Costello 2 hours to put together. It was 4 meters wide and surrounded by a plastic wall 60 centimeters high. A small set of plastic steps helped would-be paddlers climb off the edge. "I couldn't believe it was free," said Mr. Costello. "The guy at the garage sale knocked it down to $5. I still wasn't sure if I should pay it. Then he comes up and whispers, 'It's yours. I don't want it anymore.' Boom!" Grant put his head on the stiff plastic wall. "Is it okay? I mean, if it's okay, why did the guy get rid of it?" Mr. Costello shrugged. "Maybe his kids got too big for it. Maybe he wanted to put it in a real pool. Who knows? But you can't argue with a free." Grant pulled his hand away from the pool wall. "What's wrong?" said the dad. "I don't know," said Grant, gazing at his hand. "It just felt like it's hot from sitting out in this crazy sun. Come on, let's fill this baby up," said Mr. Costello. He walked over to the house and picked up the end of a lawn garden hose. 20 minutes later, the pool was full. "Let it warm up," said his father. "Water straight from the hose is cold." When Mr. Costello went inside to cool off, Grant stayed out in the yard and played frisbee with his dog Gump. Suddenly Gump started barking. Grant turned and saw an old man leaning over the pool. His stringy white hair fell past his shoulders. His skin was wrinkled like a crumpled up piece of paper. His fingernails were long and yellow. The man kept staring into the pool. It's kind of scary, isn't it? Gump barked a few more times, and the man turned. He blinked his watery grey eyes at Grant a few times. Then a weird look came over his face. He coughed and spat and muttered some words that Grant couldn't understand. He waved his arms wildly over his head and then stumbled into Grump's direction. Grant ran towards the house, Gump running alongside and barking. The boy reached the screen door and rushed inside. Quickly he locked the handle. He gazed through the screen and shouted, "Go away!" But the man was gone. He waited a few minutes to make sure the man didn't come back. Then Grant opened the door and he and Gump stepped outside. The backyard was empty. The pool sat quietly, reflecting the blazing sun. The boy walked over to where the ancient man had been standing. He stared into the pool. The water lapped gently back and forth against the curving plastic wall. Grant thought something must have disturbed its surface, but there was nothing there in the clear water. Had the hot sun made him see things? If so, why had Gump barked? The dog couldn't be seeing things too. Grant avoided the pool for the rest of the day, but the next afternoon, 2 of his friends came over to check it out. The boys splashed and played in the water, throwing a ball back and forth. Even Gump jumped into the pool a few times. Eventually, Grant forgot all about the strange man from the day before. "It's pretty cool for little kids' pool, right?" said Grant's friend Lee. "Yeah, it's awesome," agreed his friend Roddy. Suddenly, Lee got a frightened look on his face. He pointed to the middle of the pool. "What's that?" he shouted. chant. A hand rose out of the water. Lee screamed. The hand was followed by a bony shoulder and then a head covered in long, wind, stringy hair. It was the old man. The other boys screamed. The old man reached out to them, grasping at their legs and feet. Grant felt hard fingers trying to hold on his right foot, but he kicked them away. The boys climbed out of the pool as quickly as they could, tumbling onto the grass and scrambling to their feet. From a safe distance, they stood barefoot in the grass. Grant watched the old man disappear underwater. "Get away from there," Rhodey yelled at Grant. Grant looked over at his friends, who had run towards the house. Instead of his friends, there stood two old men. The men grew thinner before his eyes. Their backs arched and their shoulders hunched. Their hair whitened and fell out in clumps. Their arms and bare legs grew thin and frail. Wrinkles spread across their faces like the webs of spiders. One of the men opened his mouth to speak and a tooth fell out. "What is going on?" said Grant. "Who are you?" The old man wore the same swimming trunks and t-shirts as Lee and Rhodey. They tried answering Grant, but weird looks came from their mouths. Weird looks came from their mouths. Weird sounds came from their mouths. They couldn't speak. They could only mumble. Grant looked quickly at the pool. Where had that old man gone? Grant decided he was going to ask the old man that they had done his friends, and his mouth wasn't working properly. His tongue was thick, and his lips were numb. He raised a hand to feel his face, but the hand he saw was not his hand. It couldn't be. It was pale and flabby. The fingernails were sharp and yellow. The back door of the house banged open. Grant's father stood there. "What are you doing in my yard?" he yelled. "Get out of here. I'll call the police." "Dad, it's me," shouted Grant, but the words didn't come out this way. Your voice sounds more like a growl. "Get out, I said," shouted Mr. Costello. "Also help me." He took a threatening step towards the men. The two old men fled across the yard. Grant stood there a moment longer. He saw an old dog panting at his father's feet. The dog reminded him of a dog he had owned a long time ago. What was its name? Gumbo? Grump? While Grant watched the dog crumble to the ground, its body turned to dust and its grey hair floated off in the breeze. His father looked down at the powder that had once been their dog and cried out. Mr. Costello covered his face with his hands. Then he stared at the old man who had not run away. "Do I know you?" Grant tried to speak, but more of his teeth fell out. "You look familiar," said Mr. Costello. He had a sad, confused look on his face. The man glanced around the yard. "Where's my son? What have you done with Grant?" Grant's vision blurred. He could barely hear his father's voice. He forgot where he was. Whose house is this? He wondered. A single image stayed in his memory. The water. I must reach the water. Grant turned slowly and limped towards the swimming pool. Every step seemed to last a year. The sun burned hotter against the aging flesh. The sweat poured down his body. As the sweat dripped, it pulled pieces of his skin along with it. The bones underneath gleamed in the blazing sunlight. was less than a meter away from the pool when breeze grew strong